Probe 8. Author, Vitaly Winter. TASS reports that the Zond 8 spacecraft successfully landed on October 27th at 4:55 p.m. After orbiting the Moon, the automated station measured the physical characteristics of lunar space and photographed the lunar surface on color and black and white film. It also conducted physical studies along the flight path and in lunar space, photographed the Earth and the Moon, and tested improved onboard systems, components, and spacecraft designs. To test one of the possible return options for the spacecraft, the station re-entered the atmosphere from the northern hemisphere and successfully splashed down in a designated area of the Indian Ocean, 730 kilometers southeast of the Chagos archipelago. And this, of course, was a half-truth. No one will ever know the truth. It's better not to know. Lunar orbit, 3 days earlier, somewhere over the Sea of Tranquility. October 24th, 1973. Sanya sat in the anti-G seat, staring wearily at the gray bulkhead with its bolted-on control panel. The analog instrument dials dotting the entire bulkhead glowed comfortingly and warmly. There was catastrophically little space, but that couldn't be helped. The landing module had originally been designed for one person, and he and his partner were practically sitting shoulder to shoulder. He sat and listened to the radio broadcast. There was absolutely nowhere to look. He knew everything in the habitation module by heart, from months spent training in the cramped confines of the Soyuz 7KL-1 modules. As soon as they entered lunar orbit, his partner took over control, and he listened to the radio broadcast. Of course, there was complete radio silence, but that wasn't the main thing.
Now they weren't alone here. Something was down there. It didn't frighten them, but rather made them wary.
They'd been given hints in Zvezdny, warned of potential problems. There were tasks, orders, and they needed to be addressed. There were, after all, flight and landing programs. And this routine, for the first time in the last few months leading up to the flight, made them feel somehow calmer. Half an hour ago, just before undocking from the orbital module, when his partner, the crew commander, and his best friend, Lieutenant Colonel Anatoly Trofimchuk, was still on radio watch, they received a signal. Tolia looked at him. His face was completely bloodless. His eyes, huge, brown, and bloodshot from lack of sleep, were filled with surprise, mingled with a strange mixture of horror and admiration. He turned on the speakerphone, and a strange wheezing sound, mixed with a metallic cacophony, poured out at them, clearly artificial, and intermittently repeating as if they were listening to a recording.
"Do you hear that?"
Anatoly asked, admiringly.
"Do you hear that?"
A shrill, plaintive whistle or cry erupted from the speakers, then was interrupted by a terrible dirge of radio static, as if escaping from the ash-clogged throat of the Copernicus crater. And there was a living, inhuman melody in that sound. They exchanged glances, and it wasn't just him who felt goosebumps from the ether. His partner felt the same. Immediately, their orbital compartment pilot, Captain 3rd Rank Sergei Samoylov, contacted them. He was from the Naval Aviation and, like all of them, an excellent pilot and an expert in his field.
Through the increasingly loud interference, he croaked, "Listen, guys. Strange interference. Once you land, there might be no contact. Try using a directional antenna. Fly on, every 2 hours. Wake up, orbit." And suddenly, clearly, as if he had broken through the interference with his will, he wished, "Good luck." "Strange interference," echoed Anatoly, leaning over the control panel. Captain Alexander Zastavsky felt his heart freeze in his chest, as if someone was squeezing it. It froze, and then began beating so fast it seemed ready to jump out. Beads of cold sweat appeared on his forehead. His lips seemed stuck together. But it lasted only a moment. The landing module entered a descent orbit 100 kilometers above the lunar surface. They flew with the landing stage's legs forward and the windows facing down, so the cosmonauts could track landmarks on the surface. This was difficult because Earth's stillborn sister, which had never had the wind, clouds, or air to protect it from lifelessness, looked completely different from their home. "It looks like a gnawed skull," Anatoly said hoarsely, licking his dry lips. "Damn that black and white photograph below them," Sasha cursed silently. A single orbit around the moon was enough for them. The landing site had been explored before them. Black and white landscapes, pockmarked with craters and strange faults, flashed by below. And it was somehow alien or something. The cosmonaut wasn't horrified. Professional military pilots had no right to do that. He simply realized that something they'd gently tried to warn them about before launch was all too real. That's exactly it. A fucking dead satellite. That's exactly what it looks like under a full moon. Dead. "Calm down," Anatoly said. He spoke barely audibly in a hoarse whisper, as if afraid anyone could overhear. "It's just the lifeless rock," he said, speaking more to himself. "We'll carry out the mission and quickly launch into orbit." "Of course," Sanya agreed. "There are windows. No need for communication. We'll take off, and our orbital taxi will pick us up. And we'll have green grass at home, not these gray rocks." 300 meters, climb, he commanded, adjusting the pilot. 10 seconds to apogee, 12 to thrust reverser. They flew over the edge of Copernicus, taking a last look at the daylit environs of the Ocean of Storms. The vertical walls of the Gay-Lussac and Stadius craters, the Ejecta craters sparkling with white streaks to the southeast, the darker volcanic plains of the sea stretching to the horizon like a lifeless African desert. "Reverse thrust on command," Anatoly said. "Launch." Now they were falling. Sanya's gut told him they were descending. It felt as if his body was falling, but his vital organs were still above. He sucked in a breath and closed his eyes, trying not to see this flight, not to see this moon. But that only intensified the feeling of disorientation. The feeling of disorientation. He concentrated on the sound of his breathing, the clicking of the instruments and their dials. The reflexes ingrained in his subconscious held true. "How are we doing?" he asked. "Everything according to plan. Will I be sick on landing?" Sasha chuckled to his partner. "Thanks for the advice." "You're welcome. 40 to first landmark. So far so good." "Good." Anatoly saw the chosen crater, Copernicus. It was right in front of them for landing. For a lunar meteorite crater, it was large, almost 100 kilometers in diameter, and quite young. A baby, so to speak, a wound from a cosmic bullet that had struck here just 1 billion years ago, and the bottom was flat, like one of the dried-up salt lakes near Baikonur. At least, that's what the selenologists had told them before launch. Of course, those same selenologists had only looked at roughly accurate topographic maps from their offices, so they didn't put much stock in their words. In any case, the important thing now wasn't the method, thought the ship's commander, but the outcome of the operation. Down there, in the blackness of the crater, lurked a mystery, a problem that had to be solved. They were supposedly a rescue and reconnaissance mission. The failure of one ship and the death of its crew was a tragedy, but the failure of 2 ships was clearly no accident. However, the circumstances of their occurrence, and most importantly the timing, filled Anatoly with foreboding. Why had no telemetry been received before the final shutdown?
And why were there incomprehensible communication problems?
They hadn't been able to figure it out on the ground, and the cosmonaut who returned from the orbital capsule couldn't say anything either, even though he'd seen these things, probably hovered over them until their resources were exhausted. The only satisfactory explanation would be a micrometeorite impact, but the chances of that happening for 2 descent modules at once were vanishingly small. It was as if someone had simply pulled the plug. But on the lunar surface, there's no one to pull plugs from sockets. Anatoly felt a chill wash over him. He closed his eyes, then blinked to make sure he was truly focused again. They wouldn't get a second chance. On Earth, shadow is just shadow, a cool zone shielded from sunlight. On the moon, shadow is absolute blackness, indescribable. To find yourself inside a crater in perpetual shadow is like finding yourself on the starless edge of the universe. I've been meaning to ask you, why were we chosen for this mission? His partner asked, trying to break the silence. He already knew the answer. Because, while we weren't the best in the training group, we have combat experience and are very mentally stable and stress-resistant. We're the ones you can take a risk on, and we'll survive even shock decompression, even with our concrete heads. Besides, you, comrade, may I remind you, volunteered. Remind me not to do that again. Anatoly grinned and turned to his partner. It's too late to drink Borjomi, my friend. We're going to get a huge dose here. We might not be seen, but judging by the radiation readings outside, it'll be a real blow to our health. He tapped the instrument panel. They were both incredibly tense and, as always, relieving it by teasing each other. Panicking hundreds of thousands of kilometers from Earth wouldn't do any good. They were on their own here. He remembered reading something somewhere. Panic will kill you and make you feel like a complete idiot in the process. That wouldn't do for them. Better to fulfill their mission to the end and do something no one else had ever done before. Anatoly wiggled his toes to restore circulation, but goosebumps from the cold still crawled up his legs. After fiddling with the landing thruster controls, he began to stamp his feet, trying to come to terms with the void that yawned before him. "Everything okay?" his partner asked. "Of course. Could it have been better?" Sasha chuckled next to him. "No problem. Next time I'll fly without you. I'll leave you without all these laurels and awards. What wouldn't you do for your best friend?" "Agreed." "Fine. At least you'll come visit. You're probably trying on General's epaulets every time you close your eyes." Anatoly laughed. "Admirals. What are the parameters?" "Everything looks normal. The engines are synchronized, ready for launch. Remote flight control and telemetry are enabled. The landing angle is normal." "He won't get Admiral's epaulets. Our orbital taxi driver's already staked out those for himself." They laughed, easing the tension. After a pause, Anatoly muttered, "Okay. Then we begin making history. 40 seconds, on command. And off we go." 40 seconds. Anatoly checked his instruments again. For the first time in a long time, he felt afraid, and the sensation wasn't pleasant. The coppery taste in his mouth and the heightened awareness of everything around him reminded him of the war. 30. "I hope it wasn't a communications error, Tolya. The connection's completely gone. A blizzard of interference. I've never seen anything like it. If I find out our technicians screwed up, I'll beat them with their own hardware. And I'll help you. I'll hold them while you discipline them according to party rules. 20 seconds. All parameters are normal." Anatoly's blood began to rush in his ears. Normal. Nervousness is the norm for their profession, and he began looking for something to distract himself with. Old pilot tricks, anything to maintain his focus. He began recalling moments from his career, highlights of his short combat past, as if they were illuminated on the indicator on the visor of his spacesuit. His first 6 flights on the MiG, the Far East, the beautiful sights, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Bay of Pigs, and 3 downed aircraft. A medal. Was this the record of a coward? A sissy from Earth? Did anyone doubt he had enough nerve to make this landing, no matter why he was breathing so quickly? But he doubted himself. Always. And that was a good thing. A sober assessment of one's actions is always beneficial. A quiet warning signal sounded from the control panel, followed by his partner's voice in a work voice. Normal. Countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Launch. Step, step ignition. Below them is the dead, ancient, and familiar satellite of old Earth, like a kind of holy halo, protecting them all from space debris for millions of years, but apparently also guarding its ancient secrets from us. And it protected us simply because, not because we are somehow special or destined for great purposes, to be protected. Simply we, the occasional breathers, whose future is as dark and opaque as the ordinary planet on which we settled, or are now hidden. But there is a way out. There is always a way out. They have been shown the goal, and they will go towards it. We will lead the others, whatever the cost. They were flying at an altitude of about 200 meters above the lunar surface. His partner was bent over the control panel, practicing landing maneuvers, while he watched and adjusted them, looking out the window. The semi-automated landing program had activated. The lunar module's onboard equipment was working exceptionally well, and they were being carried toward the rim of the crater, where their destination lay. There, near the ancient crater with its half-destroyed outer rim and the half-hidden shadow of its bowl, shrouded as if in an impenetrable burial shroud. They were already waiting for them there. Sanya was looking at the surface below them when he noticed something. Something artificial floated beneath them, seemingly from the dancing shadows cast by the uneven lunar surface. A cold lump rose in his throat. There's some kind of apparatus below us, he recalled the pre-flight instructions. It's probably Surveyor 3. So, we're on the right course, his partner encouraged him in a tense voice. Once we pass the Apollo 18 landing module, we'll land on the other side of the crater, just like we planned. There was no information about Apollo 18. Sanya looked questioningly at his partner. And I didn't know they landed either. Well, we're on the moon too, and no one knows about us. And we're not the first here, comrade, he said, mangling the word comrade in the American manner. The Americans, I thought, are having a better time with their lunar program. I thought so. It was. But they're more adept at putting on a show. We can't do that. After a pause, he added, anyone can disguise their expeditions as satellite launches. And I don't think even I was given all the information before the launch. He interrupted Sanya, who was about to object. It's not because they're hiding anything there. Apparently, the information is fragmentary and unverified. They didn't want to confuse us. To scare us, more likely. Orders are orders. The main thing for us is to keep Zonda from turning into Cosmos. The Copernicus crater now emerged in all its glory from the eternal twilight, like a huge wound on the dead body of a planetoid. The strange, gloomy beauty of this dead world was mesmerizing. You look at it at first with distrust and apprehension, and then you don't dare look away. It's frightening and captivating at the same time. Suddenly, he felt a slight chill run through him, and a sticky, cold sweat covered his body. Nerves, just nerves. Or did he sense something with his sixth sense? This atrophied, inexplicable relic was officially disbelieved and ridiculed, but certainly listened to in emergency situations. He couldn't understand what he felt, as if something was watching them. He glanced down once more into the inky darkness of the crater they were slowly flying over, and his tension grew even more intense, the tension only increasing. He simply couldn't tear his gaze away from the darkness below them. They floated slowly over the crater, and Sanya's stomach clenched. The darkness that covered the ancient crater seemed absolute, and the jagged fangs of its walls, jutting straight out of the darkness, were even more repulsive up close, as if a huge creature, dark, lifeless, silent, with broken fangs and a bottomless maw, was trying to devour them. Once again, a chill washed over him, and an icy spasm of premonition gripped his stomach. Dead, but definitely not uninhabited. Why he had imagined it that way, he himself couldn't understand, but he knew it for sure. I simply felt a presence, intuition, an echo in the biofield, call it what you will. It felt like beneath them was a creepy, haunted house, made of stone, dust, and radiation, and they had moored to it, channeling all the energy of human vanity. Pioneers of space. But despite the oppressive atmosphere outside, they were glad to be here. To know that they had succeeded, that they had done it for the people, for the motherland. But there was also a strange, eerie feeling that the satellite wasn't quite dead. Or rather, somehow different, but alive, and watching over them. But somehow no one felt joy. A sense of accomplishment, yes. There was something here, radiating a strange sense of presence. An unpleasant presence. Sanya froze, distancing himself from everything, closing his eyes, trying to focus on his feelings. And he shuddered, horrified by the touch of something alien. An icy, cold tangle of thoughts, wild will, madness, and destruction touched him, awakening from slumber. And then it disappeared, as if nothing had happened. Sanya shook his head, trying to shake off the image. He was probably still recovering from the flight. It was all from fatigue and tension. He pulled himself together, distancing himself from what he'd imagined, but his breath was still catching. He took a convulsive breath, realizing that from the moment they'd reached the crater and begun their descent, he'd forgotten how to breathe normally.
We're landing according to plan near the crater rim, about 100 meters.
Sanya looked out the window.
We're definitely a clear landing area. Few rocks and...
He froze, intently examining the landing spot, now clearly visible about 300 meters away.
Why are you silent?
Anatoly asked tensely.
There's a black spot there. It looks like someone's already landed there. Any foreign objects nearby?
What objects, Tolya? Sasha asked, surprised.
Well, if it's clear, then we're landing. How's the fuel situation?
Sasha checked the instruments and reported.
A little less than half a ton in the tanks. Normal. Adjust the flight axis. We'll drop a bit, and then you can hover. Stop!
Sanya peered out the window to check the landmarks. They were about 20 meters above the surface.
Dust's rising. Be careful, don't drop us.
It looked completely different from Earth. It was as if a light gray snowfall, which slightly reduced visibility, had enveloped them. However, as the ship descended, visibility became increasingly poor.
Don't croak, partner,
Anatoly replied tensely through clenched teeth. Sanya looked out the window again. The dust around them had increased, but it didn't greatly interfere with visually determining their altitude. They were hovering over the crater rim, however the thick haze and shadows below, along with the shifting, flying dust, made it very difficult to track the rocks and, consequently, determine vertical and horizontal speeds. Altitude about 6 meters, velocity 0.15 meters per second, and horizontal speed 1 meter per second. Fuel in the yellow zone. The commander silently worked the landing systems, and soon they felt a jolt. "Contact!" Sasha breathed a sigh of relief. A moment later, their lander touched down on its remaining 3 legs. Beside him, Anatoly breathed a sigh of relief and began flicking the switches, shutting down the engines. They shook hands joyfully. It wasn't easy in the cramped compartment of the descent module. The ship's commander immediately adopted a businesslike, commanding tone. "We're taking readings from the instruments and immediately beginning preparations for the exit to the surface. We'll set up the instruments and then get out of here as quickly as possible. Contact the orbiter. Maybe you can get through to Seryoga." Sanya shook his head. "I've been monitoring the communications channel throughout the entire landing. It's the same as in orbit. Heavy interference. It almost feels artificial." "Knock on wood, Sasha." Sanya smirked, slapping his knuckles against his forehead and leaning into the radio. "I'll try the directional antenna. Maybe I'll get through to orbit." A few minutes later, Sanya tore himself away from the radio and peered up at the window. "Everything's dead. It's like we're sitting in a barrel. The same strange interference." "What the hell? What happened?" The commander tore himself away from the instruments. Sanya swallowed loudly, trying to ease the tension and cope with the low gravity. "Something's definitely happened here. Something bad." He nodded toward the nearby jagged edge of the crater. "Moscow region, 8 months before the Zond 8 flight." "Dude, it's fate. We'll be able to fly and do what everyone in the cosmonaut corps dreamed of." If so, then she didn't spoil me very much. And she punished me very painfully. If it was her, then I've become afraid of her. Afraid of fate? Stop it, friend. Not afraid of the pain. Not physical pain, of course. I understand everything. Your pain can't be eased. But you can't bring your family back either. You're living in hell now. Everyone has their own hell, Tolia. I carry mine within me. You need to distract yourself. Do something you're good at. You can't forget anything. This pain is a price for meaning, for the memory of my wife and daughter, of our life, our family. Are you sure this meaning exists? The memory of them, yes, but I must go on living. The pain gives me strength. I could die at any moment. You know, I've seen a lot. If I want to leave, my hand won't tremble." Anatoly stood silently, lit a cigarette, and opened the window. He stood there, looking out at the poplars swaying in the wind, casting arrow-shaped shadows in the summer twilight. "You're a strong man, Sanya. But why don't you do what your country has been preparing you for so long? I'm a weak man. Without my family, all that's left of me is a stump, a remnant of what was. My strength is my will and the memory of them. Only my willpower still keeps me here. You're still an officer, just as you were before. You took an oath, but we can't order you around in this situation. I ask you as a friend, do your duty and help me. You'll fly." "I've been appointed expedition commander." Anatoly turned to him and looked him in the eye. "And I need you, my friend. I can't refuse you. I can rely on you and you on me. And perhaps this will help you regain your sense of life. Time will tell. So, what's all this secrecy about? The flight detachment for the moon mission was disbanded after the explosion of the Super Heavy launch vehicles, wasn't it? It's complicated there. Maybe nothing will work out. But we got to the damn moon much earlier than we thought. Somewhere in the Schroeter Valley, not far from the Copernicus crater rim, October 24th, 1973. He looked at Anatoly. His face was drained of color. His eyes were huge, wet, and filled with a wild intensity. "See?" asked Sashka. "There, right by the teeth on the crater rim?"
About 150 meters from here. Someone's standing there. They can't be alive, can they? The commander awkwardly squeezed his way to the porthole, facing that direction, and began peering intently into the unnaturally contrasting black and white landscape. Suddenly, he jerked back and sank heavily into the commander's chair. So our supervisor wasn't lying. "Listen up, Sanya. Our ship was just landing here. Contact with the cosmonaut was lost. Something reached the orbiter through the interference, but they couldn't understand. I'd rather believe it. Then the Americans landed here, and the same thing happened. Everything was quiet for the first 24 hours. Everything was working according to plan. And then the connection was lost, and that was it. People were missing. When we were flying near Apollo 18, I couldn't make it out, but I think the capsule was still there, not just the landing section. So that was them. Or Ura. So we were the first on the moon. What difference does it make, my friend? That's not important to us right now." Sanya interrupted him excitedly. "That same Ura? Ours?" Anatoly glared at him, and Sasha immediately cooled down and came to his senses. Now think about what could have happened here. What are our scientists and our colleagues overseas racking their brains over? And that, in the midst of the Cold War, they could come to an agreement and conceal, erase from all of humanity, the loss of 2 ships and their crews? At that moment, a shrill, plaintive whistle or cry emanated from the headphones resting on the radio console, echoing throughout the cabin like a terrible dirge. And there was a warning in the sound. "What's going on here?" Sanya cursed under his breath and pressed his face to the console. He spoke into the microphone, trying to contact the orbiter. Sokol, over. This is Volga. Sokol, landing went according to plan. Sokol." Sanya tossed the headphones onto the panel and checked the communication parameters and settings again. Even from his seat, Anatoly could hear the nightmarish howling of this strange radio noise, haunting them from low orbit. "There's no contact. None at all. All bands are jammed." Anatoly felt his heart freeze in his chest, as if someone were squeezing it. It froze, and then started beating so fast it felt like it was about to jump out. "So, we have even less time left than expected. Sanya, the missing crews disappeared right after they were hit by interference. Not right away, it seems, but we leave the corner reflectors and instruments here. There's no time for them. We take the item and drag it down into the crater, and then immediately gallop back and take off. Understood?" "Understood, Commander," Sanya said, without questioning it. It was clear that his friend, the commander, was frantically trying to piece together a more or less logical answer and plan of action from the scattering of fragmentary information. Anatoly fussed around the equipment boxes, barely turning in the cramped cabin and freezing for a moment, apparently having made up his mind. He pushed aside the sample boxes and unfastened the lid of a large box. He began to pull out bundles folded in the recognizable army colors. "Here. I didn't think I'd need this, but it's better to be safe than sorry." Sanya began to unwrap the bundle.
It turned out to be a shoulder belt made of greenish fabric. It's tailored to the size of your spacesuit. Sling it over your shoulder like a Mauser. His partner chuckled humorlessly. Sanya opened the flap and pulled a monstrous barrel from his bag. It had clearly once been a standard Stechkin army pistol, but now, having lost its handguard and acquired an extended trigger guard, as well as strange seals extending from the barrel. Seeing his surprise, Anatoly hastened to explain, "We threw it together for us, so to speak, just in case." He pointed to the trigger and the missing handguard. "Well, that's obvious. And this?" He pointed to the growths along the barrel. "The technicians explained that the excess energy needs to be released. That way, it will heat up more slowly. But it'll last for a couple of clips at most, according to the calculations, and then it'll definitely jam. Those have more powerful shots, and the kinetic energy will be lethal. And one more thing." Tolya pulled several cylinders with huge, ribbed sides from his bag. "Offensive, large steel fragments, and the filling is mind-blowing. I'll only have 3 of them." "Yeah, Tolya. Did we land for a war or what?" "That wasn't planned," the commander said, spreading his arms as best he could. "You see, they gave us this just in case, and otherwise our smart guys were wondering if we'd stumbled upon some kind of anomaly. Get ready and go." An hour later, they took turns descending the narrow ladder to the lunar surface. The landing platform was covered in a layer of dust kicked up during the landing. The lunar dust, finer than Earth sand, but sharp and prickly, covered every surface on their platform and still hung around like a gray fog. It wasn't a problem now. It would be a problem when they pulled all that dust into the living compartment on their spacesuits. They quickly began opening the containers with the attached equipment. Tolya discarded the unnecessary corner reflector and the containers with the observation station installation equipment without a second thought, as if they hadn't been dragged hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Portable flashlights were also there, which they strapped to their chests. The crater was pitch black, as they'd seen from orbit. They easily pulled out the container with the equipment, 2 meters long, narrow, and apparently very heavy on Earth, and, grabbing it by 2 clamps, quickly dragged it to the crater's edge. Adjusting to the low gravity, they hurried toward the crater, warily glancing around, and staring at the whitish figure frozen near the edge of the chasm. Suddenly, his partner stopped. "What's happened?" Sanya turned toward him. "Look," Anatoly interrupted, pointing to a small boulder to their left. There, caught in the rock, lay something dark and shapeless, with a bent, shiny metal rod protruding from it. "We need to take a look. Wait." Anatoly placed the container on the regolith and walked toward the rock with the awkward, hopping gait everyone had seen in July of '69. After digging around a bit, he had to awkwardly kneel. Tolya straightened up and raised the flag, torn and apparently scorched, with dark patches to chest level. It looked black in the dead sunlight. The flag of the USSR. The light hammer and sickle stood out clearly against the dark background. "I'll take it with me." Tolya tucked the flag into his weapon harness. "That's it. Rest is over, Captain. Let's run." They carefully approached the figure frozen at the edge. He couldn't have passed her by, even if he'd wanted to. They approached within a few dozen meters of the still-standing white figure at the crater's edge, and Anatoly swallowed loudly. It was audible even over their hissing intercom. The astronaut. It was one of the Apollo 18 crew, stood frozen, rigid. Stiff, indeed, she, or rather he, was. The visor of his helmet was shattered, and his face was hidden in shadow. Coming closer, Sanya managed to squint and read the name on the patch sewn onto his chest. W-O-K-E-R, Sonia read slowly. They took a few more steps closer, and Anatoly fumbled with his flashlight, turning on the light. Then the beam illuminated the penumbra of the dead astronaut's spacesuit visor. The suit's glass was shattered, and frozen chunks of dark, frozen flesh dangled from the sharp shards, revealing the white bones of the skull. A toothless, eyeless skull, partially skinned down to the white bones of the face, stared back at them, grinning with a toothless grin. Now they noticed that the entire front of the suit was stained with dark spots and torn in several places. They froze in their seats, stunned, unable to comprehend what had happened. Anatoly broke the silence. "Listen, Captain, what if our American colleague here, let's say, died from decompression? Maybe he hit his visor on a rock, although I don't believe that. And what force of impact would that have been under such weak gravity?" At that time, Sonia was looking at the gaping darkness of the crater just a few meters away. It sloped gently downward, disappearing into the darkness just a few meters from the jagged edges ringing the amphitheater's crown. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the darkness. It seemed unthinkable to him. Turning his back to it would be like turning to a scythe-wielding figure reaching out from the darkness of the crater's ancient call. A growing, aching feeling of mental pain and hopelessness washed over him again, just like it had after the loss of his family. He knew it, felt it, his whole body shaking, covered in cold sweat. It was the same feeling they'd had when they were children, seeing an ancient cemetery in the moonlight. It was something inexplicably repulsive, torn from the depths of man's forgotten fears. A relic plucked from a forgotten and cursed grave. Something sick, reeking of darkness and ancient hopelessness, like a disturbed tombstone full of dead whispers, darkness, and madness. Their appearance here clearly boded ill, but they couldn't fly away either. Pat, duty, orders. How could he stand up here after decompressing his helmet and freeze like a statue? Anatoly nervously wondered next to him. Sonia snapped out of his stupor and, tearing his gaze from the darkness before them, glanced back at their descent module, still standing alone behind them in the clear, boulder-free area. "Who knows, buddy? Who knows?" He suddenly bumped into some foreign object sticking out behind the boulders a little further away. Wait a minute. He slowly, half-hopping, made his way there. First, he saw the helmet. A helmet without a spacesuit. Their helmet. From the Cretchet. Just as broken as the Americans. Behind some small boulders, in the shadows, lay its owner. Calmly, arms and legs stretched out as if asleep. Anatoly jumped up from behind, giving him a slight nudge. He leaned over the corpse and said hoarsely, "The hinges on the spacesuit are open. He took off the helmet himself. Give me a light, Sonia." Sonia fiddled with the flashlight hanging on his chest and turned it on. He bent down, shining the light on his partner. They both immediately recognized the face of the cosmonaut who had died, or rather, had ended his suffering. Besides the shattered helmet's triple-glazed window, the spacesuit had several other obvious damages, jagged holes framed by dark streaks. The cosmonaut's still clasped right hand held a small hammer for collecting geological samples. Their partner must have opened the helmet visor in the final seconds of his life. He couldn't have survived with such injuries anyway. But what inflicted these wounds? Wait, Sonia leaned over the body. He's got his flight bag on his side. He opened the tablet and fumbled with it. On the plastic-sealed side, over a topographic map of the lunar surface with landing plans and sample locations,
lay a sheet torn from an ordinary squared notebook. At first, the lines were neat, but at the end they turned into scrawled symbols that spilled out of the margins. A farewell letter, Sonia began to read. Hello, my dear, my beloved ones. I decided to write you a few lines to share with you, and share the joy and happiness that befell me today. Today, the Government Commission decided to send me first once again. You know, my dear, how happy I am, and I want you to be happy with me. A simple man has been entrusted with such a great national task, to pave the way to space. Can one dream of more? After all, this is history. This is a new era. In a day, I am scheduled to launch. In the meantime, you will be busy with your affairs. A very great task has fallen on my shoulders. I would like to spend a little time with you beforehand, to talk with you. But alas, you are far away.
Nevertheless, I always feel you by my side. I have complete faith in technology. It shouldn't fail. But it does happen that a person falls out of nowhere and breaks their neck. Something can happen here too. But I don't believe in it yet. Well, what if something happens? If something happens, I ask you, and especially you, Valyusha, not to be heartbroken. After all, life is life, and no one is guaranteed not to be run over by a car tomorrow. Please take care of our girls. Love them as I do. Please help them grow up not to be pushovers, not to be mama's girls, but to be real people who won't be afraid of life's bumps. Raise people worthy of the Mu Society, communism. The state will help you with this, and arrange your personal life as your conscience tells you, as you see fit. I don't impose any obligations on you, and I have no right to do so. This letter is sounding too mournful. I don't believe it myself. I hope you never see this letter, and I will be ashamed of myself for this fleeting weakness. But if something happens, you must know everything completely. So far, I've lived honestly, truthfully, with benefit to people, even if it was small. Once upon a time, as a child, I read the words of V.P. Chkalov. If I'm going to be, then I'm going to be first. So I strive to be that person, and will be until the end. I want, my dear, to dedicate this flight to the people of the Mu Society, communism, which we are already entering, to our great motherland, to our science. I hope that in a few days we will be together again, happy. Goodbye, my dears. Big hugs and kisses, and best wishes from your dad, Yura. March 1968. Below was a note, apparently written in ink. I didn't have time to hand over the letter before launch. I had to take off urgently, and now I can't send it. I'm very sorry, my family. If anyone finds this letter, please pass it on to my family and everyone else. We're not the first here, or rather, there are already owners here. I was about to launch, taking the last soil samples near the crater, when suddenly something hit me in the side. I barely made it to the ship. The air started escaping. Something pierced my spacesuit and hit my rib. I barely managed to bandage myself. The rib is clearly broken. I hope there are no internal injuries or bleeding. I still have to fly home. At first, I didn't understand what it was. I only found a piece of rock. There are many like that here. How could it have pierced the fabric of the spacesuit? Another strange thing is that there's no communication. The entire airwaves are clogged with interference. I couldn't contact Alexei in orbit, but it's okay. We still have time. I slept a little, took some medication, but I feel really bad. The wound is inflamed. There are some dark spots on my skin. This worries me greatly.
At the very end of the piece of paper were a few lines, written in clumsy, broken letters.
It's gotten worse. There's no contact. I tried to warn our people. Maybe someone heard it through the interference. There's something outside. They tore down our flag. They were pounding on the hatch. I woke up. I can't see anything out the portholes. I've clearly contracted something here. The temperature is absolutely terrible. I'm burning up, and I can't figure out what's happening to me. My head. I can't go back. I'm a danger to everyone who knows what I've contracted here. I noticed some movement near the edge of the crater. I'll go there and have a heart-to-heart talk with them one last time. There's not much oxygen left. Farewell, comrades. Anatoly pulled the flag he'd picked up earlier from under his belt and carefully covered the dead man. Sleep well, comrade. You did everything you could. Alone, without contact, the first man here. And yet you still tried to warn us. They stood over the corpse of their predecessor, silent for a moment. Tolia motioned for him to turn off the shortwave radio running between their suits. They bumped their helmet visors and began to converse. I'm getting paranoid, came a muffled voice from Sanya's helmet. Something bad happened to them. We need to be on guard. We draw our weapons and gallop into the crater, install the device, and get the hell out of here. Understood. The faster the better, Sanya nodded in response.
We'll leave the device as low in the crater as possible. There, according to the radar. According to the data, there's some kind of depression right in front of us. Turn on the lights and radios again. They've probably spotted us by now, whoever it is, Sanya said, pulling the hybrid pistol from his bag and cocking the slide, chambering around. Let's move. They climbed the ridge. Before them lay a solid sea of darkness, impenetrable, as if ink had flooded this ancient wound on the moon's body. Or blood, Sasha thought, breathing heavily, sweat pouring into his eyes. All his underwear was soaked with sweat. They turned on their flashlights and stepped into the darkness. The beams barely dispelled the gloom before them. Walking down the slope was easy. Sasha hit something with his boot and looked down. There was no dust on the crater slope, only a multitude of glittering stones, like obsidian or flint, dotting the entire surface. It suddenly became colder. They turned up the heaters in their spacesuits, but it didn't help much. The thermometer on the remote thermometer dropped sharply below 100 degrees Celsius. Be careful where you step. You could slip on the small stones. Imagine, we're treading on ancient rock formations, unknown to Earthlings, which could contain the most astonishing mineral deposits. Sashka tried, as always, to defuse the situation. Oh, come on. How useful are they if you can't even transport them back to Earth? 1 kilogram is worth as much as gold. We were also selected by weight, as I understand it. Anatoly chuckled. It's nice to know I'm a dear person to someone. And we're actually searching for God knows what. Preparing a base for mining, probably a valuable resource. Even if we find even a meter-thick layer of gold here, no one will bring it back to Earth anyway. No, of course, it won't be profitable. But think about the difference in mineral formation on Earth, where the crust formed as a result of the interaction of boiling magma with the oceans and atmosphere, and here on the cold moon. So we could find all sorts of things here, things we couldn't even imagine. That's the thing. We can't even imagine where all this could have come from, or who lives here. They fell silent, breathing heavily and scurrying down into the darkness. The cold darkness before them was pierced only by their flashlight beams, slicing the dead darkness around them into thin slices. Trying to protect them, we were almost succumbing to the cold and the subconscious tension. Anatoly shifted his flashlight beam slightly to the side of their path. Wait, he said tensely. Footprints.
They moved slightly to the left and immediately came upon footprints. Clearly, not only their dead colleague had been there, but also an American astronaut. The prints were simply unmistakable. But they were strangely looping and occasionally wandering in circles, as if disoriented.
What the hell happened here? Moon be damned. Disorientation? Yeah, and that's what caused the torn heavy-duty spacesuits and the shattered armored visors. Anatoly craned his neck forward as far as he could to peer over the bottom edge of his helmet, hoping that concentrating on this action would help ease the tension. Pilots shouldn't be nauseous, and cosmonauts especially, he thought cheerfully. However, pilots are usually inside a ship, not on another celestial body in the ancient darkness. The steam coming from his breath began to condense at the bottom of his spacesuit's faceplate. He slowly began to turn the lamp, and spots of light slid across the blackness before them. The beams, too narrow, flickered somewhere below, and to restore his sense of up and down, his companion next to him apparently widened the beams, allowing them to see the surface ahead. Where they would have to pass below, all that was visible was fine lunar dust, regolith reduced to a fine powder by billions of years of incessant bombardment from space, and a scattering of those strange, faintly glittering rocks. Looks like nothing but regolith, said his partner, Sashka, between breaths. Small rocks, breccia, visibility about 100 meters to the north. We can't see the bottom, of course, but the point for the item seems to be close. Remind me again, damn it, what we're supposed to do before installation. We leave it in the lowest part of the crater, turn it on, and get out of here. There's a third button on the panel. It activates in a day. That should give us enough time. And the first and second? His partner knew it all by heart, and he understood it just as well as he did. Their chances. That's if we want to stay here forever, Anatoly replied dully. We'll get through it, Sanya. Suddenly a dark spot appeared directly ahead of them. The old tracks led straight there. A few minutes later, completely drenched and shivering at the same time, the sweat congealing almost immediately, and the cold in their spacesuits, they reached the depression. Unexpectedly quickly, the distances dwindling in the darkness, they approached a wide gap in the crater wall. The half-buried, semicircular gap gaped like a black throat, leading somewhere below. Around the gap lay scattered piles of those same strange, glittering rocks they'd encountered above. Only here, they were much more massive, reaching several meters in diameter. We're here. Sashka looked at the commander and nervously began shining the flashlight around them. They were surrounded only by the deathly grey shadows of the boulders and the crater slope, sloping downwards, pale in the artificial light. They dragged the device into the gap and looked around in surprise. The walls of this cave were clearly artificial. At the entrance, the twisted, ancient stripes were all eaten away by micrometeorites like scabs. Inside, there was a thick layer of dust. Their boots sank ankle-deep in it. The walls were made of a strange, cellular material, clearly oxidized, and coated in layers of dust in the grooves. The semicircular tunnel led off into the depths. The beams of the flashlight were lost in its depths. Near the opening lay a strange stone, identical to many others around it, but some kind of tendrils protruded from it, and it was pockmarked with deep craters, as if someone had been repeatedly beating it with something heavy and sharp. Is this some kind of machinery? More like symbiotes, Anatoly muttered thoughtfully. And not protein-based either, but silicon-based. Where did you get this information? Yeah, don't even ask where. There definitely weren't any samples of this on Earth. Apparently, one of the Americans dissected it. If the samples weren't delivered to Earth, then whoever did dissect it. You got it right, buddy. And how many were there? What we know
is that one of our crews didn't return, and the Americans lost at least 2. Now about our charges. One theory we're positing is that we're dealing with degraded technogenic infrastructure, and these spiders are maintenance and security equipment. Robots, in short. We haven't come up with names for them yet. We'd better figure out what they are and when they showed up here, and then the names will stick. Neighbors. They parked in our orbit a long time ago, judging by the damage. Sashka nodded at the micrometeorite-ridden spacecraft. The colonel chuckled cheerfully in response. Yeah, we showed up in that time, or whatever it was. Who knows? He added more seriously, Korolov's deputy told me there's a high probability they're following the programmed sequence, and these remnants of machinery, service robots, to put it simply, are simply following simple protocols programmed thousands, maybe even millions of years ago. You know, equipment maintenance, troubleshooting, cleaning. He trailed off. Perimeter security. But we're not in that sequence. We're a hindrance and an enemy. And these neighbors are operating right where there are ice deposits. And without them, we can't build a base on the moon. Didn't you find anything else? That's the point. They didn't find anything. That's why the crews landed here. That's strange. Nothing here is what it seems. That's why they decided to show their teeth and agreed with our American friends to impose a moratorium on flights there for at least 40 years. These spiders scared both sides. And why are we going back there now? To leave a message and teach them not to do bad things to homos. You and I are relics of a bygone era, happy and friendly guys with nothing to lose, since we've already lost everything. The motherland ordered us to solve the problem, and we will solve it. They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Sasha broke the silence. Listen, what happened to the orbital modules? Both ours and the Americans are manned by one pilot and don't land on the surface. Did they come back? Who was our pilot? Did they come back? Yeah, they're all still here. Almost. Colonel Seryokin miraculously made it. The backup control panel worked. But those gentlemen from NASA didn't. They're floating around somewhere in the darkness of space with dead instruments, locked in their dead metal shells. You see, these neighbors are also playing around with electromagnetic pulses. So all the orbiter's equipment must have completely burned out in an instant. They were later seen on radar and in the optical spectrum, but to no avail. Neither they nor we could help them, nor could we contact them. If we don't succeed, then our orbiter, Seryoga, is in trouble too. Does he know? The less you know, the better off you are. No one will look for him, just like they won't look for us. Forgive me for being so frank. That's just the way things are. They began to examine the strange material the tunnel was formed from. Judging by the cracks, this thing was here even before the asteroid hit and the formation of the Copernicus crater. They cautiously, shining their flashlights in all directions, entered the rounded vaults of the artificial tunnel. Suddenly, a warning cry from the commander rang out in his helmet. Threat! Anatoly backed away from the broken walls of the tunnel at the entrance. In the light of the flashlight, Sashka at first thought he was imagining things. The huge, shiny stones at the entrance began to move. Thin, strange limbs emerged from them, reminding Sasha of spider legs, and a chill ran through his body. Myriads of similar, smaller, wriggling spiders scurried beneath the raised stones. Anatoly, shifting toward the tunnel wall and bracing his feet in the recesses, opened fire. The flashes from the rapid shots were imprinted on Captain Zastovsky's retina like photographs. A flash, and a huge stone spider, already standing on dozens of thin legs, flies away, having caught a heavy bullet shrouded in shrapnel somewhere into the darkness.
a second flash, and another spider falls upon its smaller brethren, raising clouds of dust in front of the entrance. A third flash, and the tiny spider, unexpectedly rushing at Anatoly, broke into pieces, scattering across the floor, and, suddenly, sending sparks flying. There was clearly some kind of atmosphere here. Tolya emptied his clip and began reloading. "Cover me!" Fixing himself in the honeycomb-like depressions surrounding the circular tunnel, Sashka began firing at the shadows that kept appearing at the entrance. At first, the spiders crawled chaotically, as if waking up and immediately rushing into battle. And they moved incredibly fast. He managed to shoot some only when they were already close to them in the depths of the tunnel. They shattered into tiny fragments, the pieces flying at them like shrapnel. Several of them hit him directly in the chest and the visor of his helmet, causing deep cracks and cuts on the transparent visor. Sashka felt his chest in fear. The impact had taken his breath away. The breathing gas sensors showed normal readings, meaning the suit was intact. "Sanya!" His partner's tired, lifeless voice suddenly came through the headphones.
"I've got a breach in my suit. I'm losing air. We need to break through to the ship." "Forget it. We won't succeed." His partner pulled the pin on the oversized grenade and threw it into the darkness before the tunnel. A flash of light from the explosion momentarily illuminated them, shrapnel striking the curved ceiling, once again producing a myriad of beautiful, fluffy sparks. His partner, the commander, stood on the other side of him, and at the moment of the flash, Sashka saw him clutching his broken knee with one hand, a dark spot spreading across it. His face was contorted in pain. "Bring the device inside. I'll cover you," Anatoly said quietly through the roar of interference. Yes, they had found their target, and they would fulfill their duty. He grabbed the container and rushed with all his remaining strength down the sloping, uneven slopes of the ancient tunnel. There was a thick layer of dust here, almost knee-deep, and it swirled behind him like enormous wings, dancing and trying to grab him, occasionally lit up by the flashes of gunfire still reaching here from the tunnel's beginning. He still had an hour's worth of air left, and he sped up his jumps, increasing his oxygen intake. He didn't know how much time had passed. His lungs were torn from the cold and the long run, his entire body covered in an icy layer of sweat. After another jump, he thought he saw something flash behind him, and, as if looking back, he managed to discern a vague shadow reflected on the walls and the rising wisps of dust.
At that moment, everything around him shook. Silent waterfalls of dust and stones rained down from the walls, and the mounting impact nearly knocked him off his feet. The dust around him flowed downwards like a river, and he, catching himself like a splinter, galloped on, dragging the box behind him. He knew Tolya had already been torn to pieces there, at the entrance to that ill-fated ancient tunnel crypt. He heard him curse, as always, through clenched teeth. Not angrily. No, there was no one to be angry at here. He was out of ammunition, and judging by his heavy breathing and cries, he tried to push the spiders away from the entrance with hand-to-hand combat. Then came the whistle of escaping air, his friend's death rattle, and an explosion, apparently in the tunnel itself. He cursed softly and slammed his glove against the ancient walls, soon to become his own tomb. 10 meters further on, he suddenly tumbled into a huge circular cavern. Stopping, he couldn't believe his eyes, but saw a flickering yellow light in the distance. He rushed even faster, straining his last strength into the depths of the newly opened chamber. For some reason, he knew those outside were chasing him. His partner had given him as much time as he could. The radio was going crazy and piercing his ears, but he suddenly began to understand that there was some rhythm to it, some meaning,
and that those outside were simply security mechanisms, neither living nor dead, simply fulfilling their function. Like all of them, in fact. Somewhere ahead, in the distance, a yellowish light flickered, and again, through the static on the radio, it seemed to him that someone was summoning spiders here.
Somewhere in the distance, a myriad of faint yellow lights began to ignite around him. The room he'd run into was truly enormous. His lungs were on fire, and the steam from his breath stained the transparent visor of his helmet with wet streaks. But there, in the pitch darkness, pierced only by the thin, weak beam of his flashlight, which was already lost in the dust it kicked up a few meters away, he didn't need to see anything else. A meter in front of him would be enough. He lowered the container, threw back the lid, and yanked the device's cocking handle, then pressed hard on one of the 3 illuminated red buttons. The glowing analog dial showed the countdown: 59, 58. We searched for intelligence among the distant stars, and it was right here. Strange, ancient, passive, with a mind of its own and utterly alien to our understanding. But it was intelligence, or something equally valuable. They didn't make contact. Well, that wasn't surprising. Perhaps we simply didn't understand the algorithms of their minds. A chance for the country, the world, and their divided civilization. A chance for the Soviet Union to prove who deserves a future had failed. But those living on the ancient satellite were right to fear or abstain from contact. Just as it was no accident that they found themselves in a foreign system. They are, apparently, guests in our system, and, unfortunately, not the last. Humanity was short-sighted for hundreds of years, but now it has simply gone blind when it thought that with the entrance to near space, the entire universe would soon be at our feet. Our understanding of the world around us turned out to be incorrect, and the calm pace of expansion has faltered, losing its direction. Perhaps in 50 years, someone will decide to try again. Good luck to them. But the price of this attempt will be 6 billion lives, a trickle of which could begin falling into the yawning hell at any moment.
He thought, calmly, that what they saw seemed to him not evil, but a force of nature. More like an echo, endowed with feeling. A mad echo, aching for communication. It was bored, hungry. It had been alone for a long time in the cold darkness of a dead planetoid. And dancing in the dust swirls alone, especially hungry, was sad. Having disconnected the connection and left in complete, deathly silence, he looked back toward the tunnel. There, in the tangle of swirling, flowing, shape-shifting dust, something was moving. And he winked cheerfully at his fellow sentients. That's the end. And it's so sad. He didn't even have time to react and fire when a horde of dust, swirling and flowing like water, pounced on him from the shroud of dust. Thin spider legs easily tore through the ultra-strong fabric of the spacesuit. The helmet visor shattered, and instantly solidified blood splashed into dusty swirls, enveloping the cosmonaut's dead body in an ancient shroud. An instant later, everything vanished, swept away by the fury of pure atomic flame. TASS reports, a very rare event has just been recorded
Near the Copernicus crater, in the eastern part of the Oceanus Stormy on our satellite, the Moon. The first documented volcanic eruption in the history of space exploration was detected, causing massive shifts in the lunar soil. This was a major milestone for understanding the geological structure of our satellite.
Space will be ours, comrades.